Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, How Yext Increased Labeling Efficiency 2 to 4 times. My name is Nate Karchner, and I work here at Hartex. Just as a note, today's webinar will be recorded, and we'll send a link out a couple of days after the webinar for you to rewatch and to share. And there's also going to be some time at the end of the presentation for Q&A. So if you have questions during the presentation, there's a little Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom toolbar that says Q&A, and feel free to drop your questions in there. We'll try to get to them at the end. With that, I'm really excited about today's webinar. We'll be talking about how one of our customers, Yext, saw massive improvements in efficiency after implementing Label Studio. Our speaker is going to discuss some of the problems Yext was having. She's going to share why they chose Label Studio. She's going to talk through the results post-implementation. And then she's also going to talk about how she runs the labeling teams at Yext to get maximum efficiency, all the while empowering her annotators to do their best work. So it should be a really fantastic presentation today and really fantastic speaker. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce our speaker, Dr. Vera Dvorak from Yext. So a little bit of a quick introduction for Vera. She has a PhD in linguistics from Rutgers University. She's worked as an annotation specialist, a content data analyst, a labeling guidelines creator, and a reviewer for a variety of labeling tasks for natural language processing. And at Yext, she works as a link between the data scientists and machine learning engineers on one hand, and teams of annotators in 6 different languages on the other. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vera, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nate, and good afternoon, everybody, because we already have afternoon here in New York City. Also, thanks for the introduction. I realized that I actually gave lots of public talks and presentations in linguistics, but not that many in data labeling or machine learning operations. So thank you for this opportunity. First, let me tell you a little bit about Yext as a company. What we do and what are the areas in which we operate. We are a tech company which operates in online brand management and digital marketing. And what we provide is the so-called Answers platform. It is a cloud-based suite of solutions such as listings, pages, knowledge graph, reviews, and importantly, given the topic of today's presentation, search. So search is one of our flagship products. It's an NLP-driven search engine that companies can add to their websites to answer user questions or even their employees' questions in real time. So it really looks like this, typically like this search bar that you see here that you can embed on your business webpage or your institution webpage, and it helps you to get any type of question you have about your company. So I joined Yext about 1.5 years ago in the role of machine learning operations manager. And as you can see from this flowchart, my role really is to be a link between data science team on one hand and our annotators teams on the other hand. When it comes to the data science team, I really am responsible to respond to all their labeled data needs. So this regards like the data that they need for both training and retraining language models. And this can be both for long-term projects, which have been going on even before I joined the company. And we aptly call those evergreen projects. And also short-term projects, when you just need a limited set of labeled data and you need to test some idea and then maybe discard it or go on further with it and add more labeled data. So that's like one part of my work, to respond to all of that, to be able to brainstorm and supply what is needed. And at the same time, I also need to manage annotators in a sense of making sure that they have enough data to label, that they understand the guidelines, that they know how to use the labeling tool, and also very importantly, that their questions are answered very swiftly. So they don't have any blockers which would prevent them from labeling correctly, from labeling efficiently and at a steady pace. And as you can also see from this chart, we have sort of 2 types of annotators. We have what could be called internal annotators. They are people who work full-time. They mostly label data in English, and they have been with the company for many years, so they are true experts at this point. And then we have many external annotators who have more flexible working hours. This team is more fluid. Over the course of last 18 months, I worked with people labeling in German, Spanish, Japanese, Italian, French. We plan to add more in the future. We really recently also are starting to switch from the agency-mediated model for getting these people to more freelance-based model, because that allows more direct interaction with the annotators, and it showed like it proved as something much better and giving us like more flexibility. And sometimes we even utilize company internal teams when lots of data need to be labeled in a short time. So there are times when I'm managing like teams of 30 people, and then times when it's just a few individuals. So that's really what my role is at Yext. And now, how does Label Studio fit into this picture and into how we manage labeling operations at Yext? When I came to Yext, the first task that I got was to start managing our quickly growing labeling operations. And they were quickly growing, especially when it comes to onboarding like new languages other than just English. Of course, our product is the best performing in English, which is where we started, but we want to be able to provide search and high quality search results in other languages as well, because we have customers in other countries and on other continents too. And it was made clear to me already during the interview process, this will be the hardest task. And it had two parts really, which are sort of hard to separate. One part was to re-envision how we manage the human force, but this wouldn't be possible without also updating our labeling tool that has been used up until the time. So what we had was a well-known open source labeling tool that served its purpose for a certain time, but also it had many issues. And let me just mention some of them, because maybe some of you struggle with similar issues, so you will understand like where this comes from, because there are many different tools, and sometimes these issues are like coming up again and again. So I would say probably the biggest issue was that to accomplish anything, you had to rely on these slow manual processes that are also very clumsy. And this starts with importing the data, with setting up the interface, labeling, getting feedback, exporting the data. Basically, anything was very slow, very manual, always like new surprises, wasn't really streamlined. The other issue which we had was poor visibility into annotator performance due to limited user roles. So on paper, the tool that we had several roles, but it didn't really work. And in the end, we actually ended up giving everybody admin rights if we wanted to accomplish anything. And this really wasn't ideal. And people were logging using other people's usernames to like get to see what they couldn't see. And it was again like sort of very disorganized in that respect. The tool that we had also had no way to really compare labels for the same query. So this validation functionality was super limited. Basically, the only way to compare and to get some quality metrics was to let everything be labeled by at least two people, then export the data, and then look at all those queries that had different labels where the annotators didn't agree and discard those. And on average, we lost around 40% of data that way. And sadly, so those were the tricky data, the more complex data, the data you actually need and you want to have in your training, because that's what leads to improvement. But there was no really way to get that, because there was no way to compare and to get back to those tricky queries. So again, another huge problem that we were aware of from the beginning and that we wanted to fix. The other problem was that the solution wasn't really customizable. So there are some like well-known labeling tasks in language like NER or question answering. But there we had some more like custom tasks related to our product, for example, evaluating the quality of search, sort of very high-level task. And we couldn't do that in the current software. So we had to create a company internal tool, which, however, had its own issues. And also we didn't really have resources to troubleshoot it and to improve that. So that was another like requirement we had from early on, to be able to customize the interface and to be able to add those new tasks that we maybe come up with in the future to make them part of the labeling software and of the tool. And finally, something which for me personally is super important in labeling is to be able to get efficiently feedback to annotators and from the annotators and make it accessible at any time. So you don't need to always answer the same questions again and again. And again, this is something that was not really solved for the old software. We ended up, before I came, they ended up having this super long Slack thread where people asked questions and then other people answered. And at some point, I wanted to go through it and organize it, and I just gave up because there was like it was not like it would be a loss of time. So we wanted just to start from scratch and sort of gather feedback in a different way. So facing all of this, and the frustration that came from it, we started searching for a new labeling tool. And we did very thorough process. We evaluated several competitive softwares as a service. We had very detailed list of criteria that we shared with our main candidates. We had a comparison chart. We even kept a scorecard. I remember there were like basically 3 marks you could give: a check mark, a cross mark, or a little neutral smiley face. And then we put it all together. And in the end, Label Studio came out a winner. Even though it did not satisfy all of our criteria, it satisfied the most important ones. And here is a summary of some of the like crucial components that we were searching for and that we found in Label Studio Enterprise. And that's why we decided to switch to Label Studio. So this is my penultimate slide. Let me go through this in a little more detail so you understand like why we did the choice we did. One of the things, and I mentioned that like already before, was that Label Studio provides very clear annotator feedback loops, which are very transparent. And they allow people both to leave their own comments, but also to mark things for escalation and for discussion. We immediately added, so here on the right side, you have an example of a labeling task. There is just a simple binary label, but match and no match. But below that, you see this comments field, which we added early on, actually already when we were testing the open source version of Label Studio. And this is something we use on 3 different levels. And we used it even before Hardtext themselves. They implemented this comment feature, which you might know, which is sort of like a extension of this. But the comments we use both on a personal level where people can mark things they want to maybe do later, or they have some insight they want to attach to this and they want to search for things like Annotator. I myself worked a lot as Annotator, and I know sometimes you want to mark things you want to go back to later on after you do some research, and so this is very useful. The other level where we use this, people mark things for discussion using certain keywords that later we can search on, like using filters. And the things that are marked, like you here see under comment to discuss, that means that we meet with a team typically once a week, or even more often if there are many things for discussion. And these are the things where multiple people contribute and we find a solution. And we also repurpose this little star mark in Label Studio, ground truth. And all those things that went through a team discussion are marked as ground truths. And again, you can very easily select those in your data manager. And that's something people use to go back to if they want to see how to label. It's really useful for new annotators. So they have this set of golden examples, but even for people who annotate a lot, this is something where they go to for inspiration to make sure they are doing things right. If they just want to see a few examples where they know this is how we should do things. And then the third level, I personally, as a manager of all of this, need to have a way to mark things for escalation, things I need to discuss maybe with a product team or with someone from data science, with somebody who created the project and who knows what they want. So again, I use this field to mark things that I need to go back to. So I talked about this a lot, but that's because we really rely on this feature a lot. The other thing which was like great for us was that it allowed much better team governance with its multitude of distinct roles. So we have for annotators, we use the annotator role and the reviewer. Typically, annotator is for new people who I don't want to bother with looking at the data manager and using filters. So they just do labeling and that's it. But anybody who is more experienced, or if we want them to do review or even just compare things like do resolving disagreement on labels, that's when we assign reviewer role to annotators. And sometimes we even switch between the two roles for the same person based on the project. So there are projects where you don't want people to have access to all the data, and then we use the annotator role. So it's very convenient. And then all the data scientists and engineers who are importing the data, they have the admin role, which again gives them like different rights to change the interface and so on. So again, something very, very useful for us. I also, the third point, I mentioned how it was like tricky for us to onboard like new labeling projects. With Label Studio, we really got that flexibility that we were looking for. So now it's our one-stop shop for all labeling projects. We basically can have everything under one roof, including that custom sort of made labeling interfaces that we needed given the product that we have. Moreover, we don't just use Label Studio to store to do labeling and to store those label data. But when we outsource something from external companies, let's say a huge data set of certain type, we actually import it here too. So it's really our one-stop shop for all language labeled data. And it's very convenient because also sort of it's graphically very nicely organized. So I don't need to explain to people where to find things. They sort of get access and they can find what they need. Because it's we also rely on these like projects and workspaces which are split according to languages and then according to labeling tasks. Some of the other like points, and all the last 3 points sort of they relate one to another, is that Label Studio allowed us to like have this very flexible query templating. This is something appreciated, especially by machine learning engineers who are tasked with importing data, because they no longer need to manually format queries. It's all like sort of like set for them. For me, it's the flexibility of the labeling interfaces themselves. So you don't need to be a programmer to add labels, to remove labels, to play with how far things are. I'm very picky about like how annotators see things, sort of want to make things very condensed. So even if something is imported and I'm not happy with how it looks, I can play with it. And also based on the feedback I get from the annotators, can make font larger, smaller. This is everything like super easy to do. So I really appreciate that. And then for me as a linguist, is the multitude of filtering options that you can use to search for your data, both unlabeled data and labeled data, and to sort of group data into categories and then look at them from very like detailed criteria to sort of these very general categories. Let's say you want all your data containing the word credit card from like 2 companies. Very easy to get something like that in Label Studio, and then to label because you maybe have like some special guideline you want to apply. So again, that's something which for us was very important and something that we appreciated that we can do now. So that's basically the overview of why we decided the way we did, what were our struggles, how Label Studio helped to resolve them. This is my last slide. It has some metrics which show how like we were doing before Label Studio and after Label Studio. I think probably the most important metric here is this 40% number, which really went virtually to zero when it comes to data that had to be discarded due to quality. And something I mentioned before, like basically we couldn't really look into complex data. And now that's something we focus on a lot, and it allows us to improve our models. We see more accuracy. And I think the fact that search, even though that was not our main product like a couple of years ago, recently this has been our fastest growing product, both quarter over quarter and year over year, shows that this is sort of indirect result, which at the bottom of it has really these immensely improved labeling operations. Also, maybe one thing which is clear from here, when you look at how many projects we were able to take on and how many queries per day we do. When you put all of this together, Label Studio allowed us not really to save money, but rather to shift our resources, so we could cover 3 times as many projects, 2 times as many languages, to do much more by basically using the same amount of resources in terms of annotators work and in terms of money. And we were able to do on average 2 to 4 times more while keeping the same investments in terms of resources. So let me conclude with that. And I'm looking forward to your questions that might allow me maybe to talk in a little more detail about what we are doing at Yext and how we use Label Studio to help us to do that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Vera. That was a great presentation. Hopefully all y'all were able to pull a lot of value out of it, that it was helpful. We do, like I had mentioned before, we do have some time for Q&A. So if you have questions, feel free to start dropping them into the Q&A widget there at the bottom of your screen. It looks like we do have a couple that have come in over the course of the presentation. So I'll go ahead and ask those, but yeah, feel free to start putting your questions in and we'll get them answered. So Vera, the first question I have here is somebody asked, what does an annotator's journey look like from onboarding to being fully operational?
Let me make sure. Okay, here, my audio is on. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. That actually allows me to talk a little bit more about how we do things when it comes to annotators. So really, we start every annotator, and very often we have people who have not done any annotation before. So it's more important for us that they are fluent in the target language and that they have some insight into language when it comes to their analytical thinking and ability to understand things. So we don't really look for experienced annotators. So I really need to teach them everything. And what we do is that on the first onboarding session, which usually is around 2 hours, first I show them actually Label Studio per se, without giving them any task, so they understand the technical part of labeling. And because it's pretty intuitive, it's usually a matter of 5-10 minutes. I let them try to do a few things, just select maybe something, mark an answer. So we start by doing that technical overview. Then I always show them the labeling guidelines for one task, which they will start working on. So we keep those separately. Actually, we have those usually in the form of a Google document. I know Label Studio has a space for some guidelines, but we are not utilizing that, I must admit. So we have guidelines separately. We go over the guidelines, and then we practice applying those guidelines immediately, by going again back to Label Studio. They try to label a few things. And then I give them 1 day to read the guidelines, to test it. And I would say from the second day, they're basically onboarded and they're labeling. And then we rely on these comments and marking things for discussion, or even skipping things, all these features that Label Studio has to improve their understanding of the task. So typically within 4 or 5 days of labeling, you can see if it's a good annotator, they improve immensely, from, I don't know, let's say doing 100 queries per day to doing 400. And then you have them on track within a few days. So that's
awesome. Thank you. It looks like we have another question here. How do you repurpose existing infrastructure and processes in place when onboarding a new language?
Yeah, that's actually not something too difficult to do. So as I said, we just create, so we have these workspaces in Label Studio. So new languages just get like a new workspace. And then I basically mimic the tasks we had there, because the type of tasks that we do are the same, the labeling tasks themselves. So you can keep the same labeling interface. And it's about just like importing different data. So it's, I would say, very, very straightforward. The only difference is when you need to discuss issues in those languages, which I do. So unless you speak a language, you need to have Google Translate or some other translator open so you can test those queries. But other than that, it's super straightforward. There's like not really anything where you would have to think too much or do. So it works, and we use even languages that don't have like Latin alphabet, and we never had issues with that. And that's actually something where we also want to grow. That was probably one of the main reasons why one of the two main reasons I would say was because we want to scale in that area. So currently the stats that I mentioned before, that's basically just 6 languages or types of labeling tasks that we do right at the point when I was writing this, it was 9 types, but now we have even more. So the types of labeling tasks and number of languages is something that's continuously growing, and it's also thanks to this flexibility. So I see I have
Yeah, we got a couple other questions here. So what are some of your favorite features about Label Studio?
Yeah, I think it was clear from my presentation. It's the comment field and the ability to use filters to search through that, to search based on strings of letters or words. That's really my my favorite feature, to sort of have this very detailed insight into your data, and both from the labeling perspective, what labels were assigned, but even what type of data you have there, and you can go through it. I think that's the linguist in me who appreciates that. So these, yeah, really, I can also say what are my not favorite features, which is about what I appreciate about Label Studio is that that's something we are still working on. And in a way, it's something what we also like about collaboration with Hardtext, that even though it doesn't have everything that we wanted, is we are still working on improving those. And those are some of the things which come to the productivity and how to actually filter based on how much work people did. There are still some things where I think there could be more improvement. Again, you can use filters to learn a lot, but I think you could do even more with that. So use this opportunity to mention both. I hope it's okay.
Yeah, we love an even-handed review for sure. Cool. So we've got another one. What advice do you have for other companies who are thinking about standing up a data labeling practice?
I would say to definitely do testing. Don't buy the software just based on what is written about it or what its owners or developers tell you, but test it on your own, and then on the type of data that you have and what you need. This again, not all softwares allow you have open source version like Label Studio does, but they typically can give you license for free and they allow you to play with it. And it shouldn't be just somebody like me who is more focused on the data part and on the language part, but also it should be definitely somebody who will import the data. So some machine learning engineer. So people from both of these categories should test, and then really, so they need to test API, they need to test documentation. I would say really dig deep into that before you commit to anything.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, is there anything from sort of an organization perspective that you think that you would advise people on, or how they set things up in terms of their data labeling teams or anything?
Yeah, I would say it's never so. It's never just the software that does it all for you. You have to have the people who will use it. It's a great tool if it's used by people in the right way. And it's almost for us at Yext like inseparable. So all of this improvement came from both like starting to manage things in a different way. Somebody had to have an idea, had to be able to see maybe we are not doing it the best way. So you sort of want to put the right management and the right people together with the right tools. And then I think things sort of like very nicely get into synchrony, and you will see results. And it's also a long, how do you say it in English? Like long-term run. It's, you don't see the results. Be patient, because you won't see the results immediately. Like labeling is at the very bottom of everything, and just to get enough data, review the data, resolve disagreement, then like retrain the models, then like implement them, get them into production, get the feedback from users. That takes time, but so be patient there. But I think we already, even though we are still in many ways not at the end of this whole process, we already see improvement. And just the way that the annotators seem more happy, and they definitely are more productive, like hugely more productive, which I think because they have this good software and they have all the response they need, and they feel they can contribute more. That all sort of like plays together very, very nicely from the organization perspective.
That is awesome. So here's another one. This is a little bit more on like a kind of career note. Somebody asked, what was the career transition like for you from being a linguistics professional to machine learning operations manager, and why did you make this transition?
That's a great question. It's almost, I could talk like at length about this. For me, the transition was, I would say it was transition for the best for me, even though I was definitely afraid of that. I was especially afraid because as a scientist, you are used to sort of work a lot, but also at your own pace and not really be constrained by anything and anybody telling you what to do. That's a big switch if you go to industry. But luckily for me, the change happened during COVID, when the rules like became much more lax in that area too. So I never really experienced this like corporate culture, like of, working like, 9 to 5 or 9 to 6. So that was, for me, I would say it helped that the culture in the corporate world also changed itself dramatically within the last couple of years. So that, and from the other, I am a person, even though I am a scientist, and I still feel primarily as a linguist. And so what was great for me is that I am too practical to stay in academia for the whole life. And currently, I don't think there's actually a better time to switch to industry for a linguist than these days, when the questions that you need to solve and look at, they're so exciting that they are definitely comparable with the scientific questions that you have as an academic, with like the development that we see just within the past 2 years, with all especially related to large language models, and how language AI is really at the top of most people's attention. It's just super exciting. And also what I like about it, that it's very practical. You're sort of really much more in touch with the real life, with everyday life, with what people search for, truly. So that's something what for me personally was that makes me even more excited about my work, I would say, than I was before. It might not be for everybody, but for me it worked great.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Here's another question. I think this is a great question. So language is an ambiguous subject. How do you empower your labeling team to label with confidence to ensure productivity and efficiency, instead of getting a bunch of comments asked for clarification? Do you want me to take another run at that?
Oh yeah, let me read it myself.
Yeah. It's a long question.
No, but it's a great question. I think yeah, so you always get comments asking for clarification, but I think the strategy that I apply could be sort of compared to a funnel. So at the beginning, there are many questions about different things, but one by one, really, there's nothing else than hard work going over. So people start labeling and they mark things they want to discuss, they don't understand. And it could be 50% of your data at the beginning, even more. and you go over them, but then you see it's repetitive, there is a pattern. And then you sort of narrow that down more and more. And in a good labeling project, when the task is sort of clear, you see this funnel effect where it's less and less questions that you have problem with, that people struggle with. And in the end, there are basically no questions. So people understand it. And there could be like this very rare example occurring from time to time. And if that's the evolution you have, I would say that means your labeling is going on well. And we, for several projects, we see this tendency, and that means like what you're doing makes sense. So it's not frustrating in a sense, like always having this load of issues. However, it can also happen that the project itself is set up maybe in a wrong way, or the original question was like the hypothesis was wrong, or the set of labels you work with is not defined properly. Maybe there's too much ambiguity or too much overlap. And then you see this frustration, and even if you try to resolve things for discussion, it's not really going any further. You don't see the funnel effect. And at that point, it won't help if you do more discussions. You just need to go back to people who came up with this project, and you need to brainstorm about how to redefine it. So that's where, but you also learn that from annotation. That's why I think it's a super powerful tool. It's either like gets you lots of quality data, or it tells you your question or idea was wrong to begin with. And in both cases, I think that's a like very useful outcome.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Here's another one. What are some of the success metrics you look at to evaluate your labeling team's performance?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something where we are still like a bit struggling too, given some of the tools that we have. So when I onboard annotators, very often they ask, because they are used maybe to this from other companies too, will there be a limit how much I have to do? And is there like a number I need to go through? And I always tell them, no, the metrics is not like there is this number of tasks you need to do and then you're done. For us, the metrics is really a relative improvement over time. So we need to see, you need to see that when people start, they usually need some time to get used to a task, to maybe even research and go back to the guidelines. But then over time, they should improve. And then we compare them again, relatively one to the other. But again, it doesn't mean that this fastest annotator is always the best if they are not as precise. So you also need to take that into account. I always tell them it needs to be this balance between quantity and quality. So you don't want somebody who is super slow and like doesn't do much, but you also don't want to be super fast and then to overlook things, because as you know, garbage in, garbage out, and lots of garbage doesn't mean like, that's what I always say. It's not the data, it's not lots of label data that helps you. It's lots of high quality label data that really gets you somewhere. And that has been my motto, like, you know, since the beginning, since I entered this business, this, you know, this industry. And the other so one of the metrics is this like relative improvement over time, and then not really, and then comparing them one to the other for the same project. The other one, that's something we've been looking at, is like, you know, so labeling is hard. You cannot just for 8 hours straight just label. You need to take breaks. But also you need to like understand, like to balance this again. So some of the, not the success metrics, but one of the things we look at, and that's what Label Studio allows to an extent, is to see like the intervals, the time, like that, what is the like mean time of which people need to complete a query, how long are the breaks they take between like labeling queries. So these are some other things we look at, and in the future, we want to automatize this even more, so we can have these productivity logs that basically give you all of this without having to do much research and using filters. So you would just see a graph, and it shows you how many queries an annotator did within an hour, how that compares to the others, you know, how much time they actually spent labeling out of the total time they had that day. So I hope I answered that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Yeah, it looks like we are about at time. So anyway, I just want to say another big thank you to Vera. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and experience and expertise with us. And thank you everybody who attended. We will, again, this has been recorded, so we'll send a recording out. In the meantime, everybody have a great rest of your day. And, and again, another big thank you to Vera and the folks at Yext.
Thank you. And I also wanted to say, if anybody wants to reach out about this topic, because I'm really passionate about it, like especially from the language perspective, then don't hesitate to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn and I'm easily accessible there. So shoot me a message.
And
thanks, Nate.
Yeah, and if you're interested in learning more about Label Studio or getting a demo from one of our folks, you can hit us up at sales@hartex.com or on our site. There are plenty of links to see a demo. So thanks again, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.